Whispers Beneath the Rain by voice of Sophia. The Boy Who Fixed Shoes. Ethan's world was small, confined to the dusty cobbler's stall on the corner of Queensway and Alder Street, a narrow strip of road that barely saw the warmth of sunlight on a good day. The luxury cafe across the street was always busy, its shiny windows reflecting a life he would never know. But it was that cafe, its polished floors and rich velvet curtains, that gave Ethan a glimpse into another world, one where the glint of wealth sparkled with every moment, and where beauty existed in the form of people like Isla Thornton. Every morning, just as the bells of the nearby church rang at 7, she walked past his stall, a vision of grace. Isla. The name alone sounded like something pulled from a dream. Blonde hair that caught the light like a halo, eyes the color of the deepest sea, and skin so fair it seemed to glow against the gray backdrop of the street. She moved with purpose, a woman whose very presence commanded attention. And yet, Ethan remained invisible to her, just another face in the sea of the forgotten. Each day, he would watch her, his heart racing as if it could leap from his chest. His fingers, worn from hours of working leather, would pause in their tasks as she passed. Her sharp heels would click against the pavement, and for a brief moment, the world around Ethan would fade away. It was during those fleeting seconds that he wondered what it would be like to stand in her world, to share in the elegance she wore like an invisible cloak. But Ethan had never spoken a word to Isla. She was rich, cultured, and everything he would never be. And he, a humble cobbler's son, was content to remain in the shadows, patching shoes and mending lives as best as he could. The first time she noticed him, it wasn't because he stood out in the crowd. No, it was because the rain had caught them both off guard. The heavens opened up suddenly, and the downpour turned the street into a river of gray. People rushed for cover, but Isla didn't have the luxury of an umbrella. She turned in the direction of Ethan's stall, hoping for some protection from the relentless rain. The broken awning above his shop barely offered any refuge, but it was all there was. Isla hesitated for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the stall. She could have sought shelter in the cafe, but instead, she stepped toward him, the rain slicking her hair against her face. Ethan had been fixing a pair of leather boots, his hands stained with dye, when she approached. For a moment, he thought she would keep walking, but then their eyes met. "Do you mind if I wait here for a moment?" she asked, her voice soft, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. Ethan blinked, unsure if she was really speaking to him. "Of course, miss." "Isla," she said with a small smile, stepping closer. She glanced at the shoes on his workbench. "You do good work," she added, taking a few steps closer to examine a pair of polished shoes. The compliment caught him off guard. "Thank you, Miss Isla. I'm just trying to fix what I can." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I've noticed you here every day. I didn't know cobblers could be artists." Ethan's cheeks flushed. I just make sure the shoes last a little longer." For a moment, the sound of the rain was all that filled the space between them. Ethan's heartbeat thudded in his ears, and he could feel the heat of her presence, even though there was a significant distance between them. Isla shifted slightly, her gaze lingering on the worn leather and the tools strewn about his tiny stall. "I'd never have guessed that such craftsmanship could come from a place like this," she said, her tone thoughtful. "It's a shame more people don't appreciate the small things." Ethan nodded, unsure how to respond. His hands had gone still on the boots, and all he could do was stare at the ground, feeling like a fool. "You're not just mending shoes," Isla continued, her voice softer now. "You're preserving something important. History, really. I never thought of shoes as something to be saved until now." Ethan glanced up, surprised by her words. "I suppose. People throw things away so easily these days." She smiled again, the expression warm and genuine. "I like that about you. You understand the value of things, and people." Before he could respond, she looked out at the rain. "It seems I'll have to wait a little longer before I can make a run for it." Ethan glanced at the downpour, knowing full well that waiting wasn't an option for someone like her. "You're welcome to stay here until it stops," he offered. "It's not much, but it's dry." Isla laughed lightly. I don't mind a little rain, but it's nice to know I have an option. She settled against the counter, her eyes meeting his again. Tell me, Ethan, do you sketch? He was taken aback by the question. Sketch? I mean, sometimes. Just for myself, really. May I see? Ethan froze, unsure of how to answer. But something in her eyes told him to trust her, so he reached into the small drawer of his workbench and pulled out a worn sketchbook. He opened it to the first page, revealing simple sketches of shoes, buildings, and people. Nothing spectacular, but honest work. Isla took the book from him, her fingers brushing against his hand for a brief moment. She flipped through the pages slowly, examining each sketch with surprising care. You have a talent, she said softly. You should share it more. He looked at her, unsure how to respond. I never thought anyone would be interested. Isla smiled, returning the book to him. There's a beauty in what's often overlooked, Ethan. You should never hide that. And with that, the rain finally started to slow. Isla stood up, brushing off her coat. Thank you for the shelter. I'll be going now. Ethan nodded, feeling a strange sense of loss as she turned to leave. But then, she paused. I'll be back tomorrow, she said over her shoulder, her voice like a promise. Ethan stood there, watching her disappear into the misty rain, his heart still racing from the unexpected encounter. She would return. She would return. And somehow, he knew his life would never be the same again. A glance in the rain. The next morning, Ethan found himself waiting, though he wasn't sure for what. The routine of his life, the sound of leather being stitched, the steady rhythm of his work, everything felt like it had been suddenly colored with the possibility of something more. Isla had said she'd come back. He had no reason to believe otherwise, but doubt still lingered at the edge of his mind. As the church bells rang, he resumed his usual task, his hands moving almost automatically. He had just finished repairing a pair of boots when he heard the unmistakable sound of heels clicking against the pavement. His heart stuttered. And then, there she was, standing at the entrance to his stall, just as he'd imagined in the silent moments before sleep. Isla. The rain had started again, softer than the day before, but she hadn't waited for it to get worse. She had come anyway. Her umbrella was nowhere in sight, and she was drenched, her blonde hair sticking to her face, the rain beating on her coat like little diamonds. I thought I might catch you this time before the rain got too bad, she said, her voice light, almost teasing, but there was something more. A spark, like a quiet promise in the air. Ethan didn't know what to do with himself. Her presence was always so overwhelming in the best way, and today, it felt even more so. You didn't have to come. You could have gone to the cafe or... He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Gone somewhere warmer. She shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. I wanted to see you. And I think I have some things I need repaired. She pulled out a small leather wallet from her bag. Could you fix this? It's one of my favorites. Ethan accepted the wallet, running his fingers over the worn leather. It's beautiful. It'll be an easy fix, he said, trying to hide the fact that his hands had just gone a little clammy. How have you been? She asked, her tone curious. I meant to ask you yesterday, but then, well, you know. The rain. I've been good, he answered quickly, glancing up at her. His heart was still pounding, and he could feel the rush of words bubbling up. But what would he say? How could he explain this strange feeling that had settled in his chest every time she was near? Isla leaned forward slightly, her eyes twinkling with something unspoken. You're good at this, aren't you? Not just with shoes, but everything you do. There's a certain care in your hands. He swallowed. I try. You try well, she said softly, her gaze falling to the leather wallet. I think you could do much more than just fix shoes, Ethan. Her words hit him like a wave. More? He wasn't sure what she meant. Did she see something in him he hadn't seen in himself? He wondered if she was just being kind, or if there was something else, something that reached beyond the quiet admiration they shared in their brief moments together. "I'm not sure what else I could do," he murmured, almost to himself. "You could show the world what you're capable of," Isla said, her voice laced with sincerity. "Your talent shouldn't be hidden away like this. I mean, just look at this place." She gestured to the small stall, the shelves lined with worn shoes and leather. "There's beauty in these things, Ethan. You've already made them beautiful." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by her words. No one had ever spoken to him like this, not like this. Not with such certainty. He wasn't sure whether to be flattered or embarrassed. "I just do what I know how to do," he muttered. Isla smiled knowingly. "Everyone starts somewhere. But where you start doesn't have to be where you end." For a long moment they stood in silence, the rain continuing to fall around them, a soft patter against the pavement. Ethan's mind raced with the weight of her words, but his voice remained quiet. "You're a dreamer, Isla," he finally said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I don't know if that's for me." She laughed, a sound that made his heart skip. "Dreamers make the world go round. I think you're more of a dreamer than you realize." She was so close, standing just a few feet from him, and in that moment, Ethan wanted to say something more, to tell her about the dreams he kept hidden, the sketches of places he'd never seen, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could do more than just fix shoes. But he didn't. The words seemed locked inside of him, tangled in the silence that always hung between them. Isla turned to leave, but she paused at the entrance, looking back at him over her shoulder. "I'll be back in a few days," she said, her voice a soft promise. "Take care of that wallet. And, take care of yourself, Ethan." And with that, she disappeared into the rain, leaving Ethan standing there, holding the wallet in his hands, feeling like he was suddenly on the edge of something far bigger than his little stall. Letters never sent. The days that followed Isla's second visit were a blur. Ethan's thoughts were filled with her voice, her smile, and the warmth she had left behind in the small, cramped space of his cobbler's stall. She hadn't returned just yet, but he knew she would. She'd said she would, and Isla always kept her promises. But even as the hope that she would walk through his door again grew, so did the growing sense of uncertainty. Ethan had always kept to himself. His life was simple, orderly. He worked, he ate, he slept. Nothing ever seemed to shift, and it was easy to convince himself that his quiet existence was enough. But now, things were different. The words Isla had spoken about dreams and hidden talent echoed in his mind every night as he lay awake. What if he could do more? What if he could make something of himself that wasn't just tied to this stall, to fixing things for others? The thought lingered, like a whisper in the dark. That evening, after finishing his repairs, he sat down in the corner of his tiny room behind the shop, and with the dim light of a single candle flickering beside him, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He opened the drawer where he kept his old sketchbooks. They were filled with half-finished drawings, his attempts at something more, something grander than cobbling shoes. He pulled out a blank sheet of paper, dipped his pen into the inkwell, and began to write. He didn't know why he was doing it, but the words poured out, unbidden, like a release. He wrote to her, though he never intended to send the letters. They were for him, a way to voice the things he couldn't say aloud. "Dear Isla, I find myself thinking of you often, in the quiet moments when the world seems to slow down. When I hear the sound of shoes against the pavement, or when I fix something that has been broken, I wonder if you remember me. You said that I could be more than just a cobbler, but I'm not sure how to take that. The world I know is small, confined to the smells of leather and the hum of a needle through fabric. But there's a part of me that wonders if you're right. That maybe, just maybe, there's something more out there for me. I don't know what that is, but it's a thought that haunts me at night. I wonder if I could be someone different, someone who could be more than just a pair of hands mending things. But that's just a dream, isn't it? Ethan." He paused for a moment, his pen hovering over the paper. The words felt like a betrayal, an admission of something deep inside him that had never seen the light of day. But as much as he wanted to tear the letter up and shove it back into the drawer, he couldn't. There was something about Isla's belief in him that had cracked something open, something that felt like hope. He folded the letter and placed it in the drawer, alongside the others, letters never sent, thoughts never shared. He didn't know if he'd ever be able to show her any of them. But the act of writing them had felt freeing, as though he had whispered his deepest desires into the universe. Underscore 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 underscore. A few days passed, and there was still no sign of Isla. It wasn't unusual, she was a busy woman, after all, with her art gallery and the high society life that surrounded her. But the silence between them was beginning to gnaw at Ethan. He couldn't help but wonder if her absence meant something more. Had she changed her mind? Had she forgotten the small cobbler who could barely string two words together? It was on the 5th day after her last visit that he saw her again, but not in the way he had imagined. He was out front, fixing the leather of a handbag when a car pulled up outside his stall. A sleek black car, with tinted windows and an air of wealth that seemed to make the air itself shift. Ethan paused, confused, his fingers still clutching the leather, when the passenger door opened and out stepped none other than Adrian Carlyle, Isla's fiancé. The man was everything Ethan was not. Tall, confident, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. His presence was powerful, as though the air itself bent around him. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether he should speak or pretend he hadn't seen him. Adrian didn't waste any time. He walked straight up to the stall, a hint of arrogance in his stride. "You're Ethan, right?" he asked, his voice smooth, like silk wrapped around steel. Ethan nodded slowly, his throat tight. "Yes, sir." "I'm Adrian Carlyle," Adrian continued, extending his hand. Ethan hesitated for a moment before shaking it. "I've heard a lot about you." Isla's fiancé had heard about him? That didn't seem right. He was just a cobbler. Adrian wasn't the type of man who bothered with people like him, was he? I hope it's good things," Ethan stammered, unsure of how to act. Adrian's lips curled into a small, almost patronizing smile. "It's all very interesting. Isla speaks highly of you." He paused, as if considering something. "In fact, she's mentioned your talent." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Isla?" "Yes. You've become quite the subject of conversation, it seems." Adrian looked Ethan over, his eyes briefly scanning the small, cluttered stall. "She's a woman of high standards, you know. She doesn't waste her time on people who can't offer something more." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just a casual remark. Adrian was sizing him up, testing him, and in that moment, Ethan realized something. He wasn't just some forgotten face in the crowd anymore. He was a part of Isla's world. A world that didn't belong to him. Adrian continued, "I'm sure you understand what I mean. Isla and I are about to take a big step together. I hope you'll respect that." Ethan stood there, his mind racing, but he nodded slowly. "Of course," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As Adrian turned and walked away, leaving Ethan to process the weight of his words, one thing became painfully clear: Isla was about to be pulled deeper into a world that Ethan could never be a part of. And yet, the letters, the thoughts, the unspoken bond, it all remained in the quiet corners of his heart, far from the world that Isla was destined to occupy. Brushstrokes of hope. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's routine remained largely unchanged. The rain had stopped, the sun had returned, but the quiet ache inside him, the one that seemed to grow every time he thought of Isla, remained. Every day, he returned to his small stall, repaired shoes, and buried the thoughts he couldn't bear to voice. He had told himself that the space between them, the world that divided them, was simply too vast for anything to ever come of it. Isla was rich, sophisticated, and set to marry Adrian Carlyle. She had everything he could never have. And yet, the thought of her lingered in his mind like the smell of leather and fresh rain. Then, one evening, as he was packing up for the day, there was a soft knock on the wooden frame of his stall. Ethan turned, expecting a customer looking for a last-minute repair, but what he saw made his heart skip. Isla, she stood in the doorway, her coat pulled tight against the evening chill. Her hair was a little disheveled, as though she'd come from somewhere in a hurry. She held a large leather-bound book under one arm, its edges worn and yellowed with age. "Isla," Ethan said, startled by the sight of her. I didn't expect to see you again so soon." She smiled, her eyes soft but intent. "I couldn't wait any longer," she said, stepping inside the stall and glancing around as if she had never truly seen the place. "I've been thinking about what you said. About showing the world what you can do." Ethan's heart tightened in his chest. "You've been thinking about me?" Her smile widened at the question. "Yes. I've been thinking a lot about you." She paused, her gaze flickering to the leather book she carried. "I have a request, Ethan. Something I think you'll find meaningful." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of request?" Isla placed the book on the counter between them, her fingers tracing the worn cover. "This book," she began, her voice low, "has been in my family for generations. It's a collection of illustrations and sketches, original works from artists who've helped build the reputation of our gallery. It's falling apart." She sighed, her gaze moving away from the book as if it were a relic too precious to touch. "I want you to restore it." Ethan's heart skipped. "Restore it?" "I'm not sure." "I know what you're thinking," Isla interrupted, "but trust me. You're the only one I know who could do this. You have a way with things, Ethan. With people. And with details." Her words made him pause. He had never considered himself anything special, but there was something in the way Isla said them, like she was seeing something in him that he had never truly acknowledged. She was trusting him with something delicate, something rare, and it felt like more than just a job. "You'll have to take your time," she continued. "It's not an easy task. But I believe you can do it." Ethan swallowed, his mind racing. He wasn't sure he could restore a book so precious, but then again, this was his chance. His chance to prove something to himself. "I'll do it," he said before he could stop himself. "I'll restore the book." Isla smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Thank you, Ethan." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes lingering on him before she spoke again, softer this time. "I'm glad you're willing to help." As she turned to leave, she paused. "Oh, and one more thing," she added with a playful glance. "I'll be here every evening while you work on it. I'd like to see the progress. If that's all right with you." Ethan's heart raced at her words. He had imagined being alone, working in silence, but the idea of having her by his side, watching him as he worked, filled him with an excitement he hadn't known in years. "I'd like that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Underscore 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 underscore. Over the next few days, Ethan poured himself into the restoration of the book. He carefully turned each delicate page, inspecting the faded ink and yellowing paper, slowly bringing the sketches back to life. The work was intricate and painstaking, but with each passing hour, he could feel a sense of purpose that had eluded him for so long. He wasn't just fixing something, he was creating something new, something that had been lost for years. And every evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Isla would appear, her presence a quiet, comforting presence in the background as he worked. She would sit in a chair near his stall, watching him with an intensity that made his heart flutter. They didn't speak much during these hours, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with a growing understanding that neither of them had the words to express yet. One evening, after several days of working on the book, Isla spoke up. I didn't think it would be like this, she said, her voice soft, but filled with wonder. Watching you work. It's like watching something come to life. Ethan looked up from his work, surprised by the emotion in her words. It's just a book, he said, shrugging. It's not anything special. Isla shook her head, her expression serious. It's more than that, Ethan. It's a part of history. A part of us. She gestured around the small stall, her gaze sweeping over the shoes, the tools, the humble setting. And you're a part of it too. Her words hung in the air, leaving Ethan momentarily speechless. He wasn't sure what to say, but before he could form an answer, Isla stood and walked over to him. She placed a hand gently on his arm. I've been thinking about what you said before, she continued, her voice quiet. About dreams. I think maybe you're right. Maybe we all have dreams that we hide from the world. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. Isla, But she didn't let him finish. Instead, she smiled, her eyes soft and knowing. Don't hide your dreams, Ethan, she whispered. Show them to the world. Show them to me. Price of dreams. The days stretched into weeks, and with each passing moment, Ethan's life began to feel different. The restoration of the book was nearing its completion, and the quiet evening meetings with Isla had become a ritual. She had stopped asking questions about his life, and instead, there was a gentle understanding between them. It wasn't just about the book anymore. It was about something more, something that neither of them had named, but both could feel. But even as his bond with Isla deepened, Ethan couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. His work on the book had rekindled something inside him, something he had buried long ago. A part of him wanted more. He wanted to see his sketches, his drawings, his ideas come to life outside the confines of his tiny stall. The thought of showing them to the world, of putting his heart on display, terrified him. Isla, with her quiet encouragement, had made it seem so simple, just show the world what you can do. But what if the world didn't care? What if his dreams, his art, meant nothing? The fear gnawed at him, and he found himself hesitating, caught between the pull of something new and the safety of his old, familiar life. Then, one evening, as he was finishing the final touches on the book, Isla spoke again, her voice laced with excitement. I've been thinking, she said, her eyes bright with a new idea. There's an art competition coming up. It's called the Rising Stars Exhibition. It's open to up-and-coming artists, and I think you should enter. Ethan froze, his hand stilling over the leather of the book. Enter? But I'm not. I'm not an artist like that. I'm just someone who fixes things. Isla's smile widened. That's exactly why you should enter. You have something special, Ethan. I've seen it in everything you do, the way you bring life to broken things. You don't have to be a traditional artist. You just need to create something that's yours. Her words were like a spark, igniting something inside him. He knew she was right. He had created something beautiful in the book, something that had come from his heart, his hands. And the idea of sharing that with the world, of finally stepping out of the shadows and into the light, made him feel alive in a way he had never experienced. But there was a catch, as there always was. Isla's fiancé, Adrian, had strong ties to the art world. He had been the one to push for her involvement in the exhibition, hoping to get the kind of recognition that would elevate her career. Adrian, with his polished manners and sharp business acumen, had the power to make things happen. And when he found out about Ethan's plans to enter the competition, he didn't take kindly to it. One afternoon, as Ethan was working on a sketch in the back of his stall, Adrian appeared at the door, his presence as imposing as ever. His sharp suit, dark eyes, and confident stride made it clear he was a man used to getting what he wanted. Ethan, Adrian said, his voice smooth but with an edge. I need to speak with you. Ethan looked up from his work, his heart racing. What is it, Mr. Carlyle? I understand you've been considering entering the Rising Stars exhibition, Adrian began, his tone casual, but there was an underlying menace in his words. I don't think that's a good idea. Ethan's brow furrowed. Why? I don't see why it would matter. Adrian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It matters because Isla's name is tied to that competition. She's an established figure in the art world, and we have certain expectations to uphold. We can't afford for someone like you, he motioned dismissively to Ethan's humble stall, to tarnish that reputation. The words hit Ethan like a slap. His stomach churned, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. He had thought Adrian would be supportive, or at the very least indifferent. But now, it was clear, to Adrian, Ethan was just a threat, a man who could ruin his carefully constructed world with one stroke of the brush. You should know your place, Adrian continued, his voice low and firm. Isla's future is set. She doesn't need distractions. The weight of Adrian's words settled over Ethan like a suffocating blanket. He wanted to fight back, to say something, but what could he possibly say? Adrian had everything, money, power, status, things Ethan could never have. The idea of going up against him in a public competition felt like a losing battle. I'm just trying to do something for myself, Ethan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Adrian's smile grew colder. And you think you can just waltz in and take the spotlight from Isla? From us? He paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing. You're nothing but a cobbler, Ethan. And that's all you'll ever be. The words stung, but they also fueled something inside Ethan. He stood up straighter, his fists clenched at his sides. No, he thought. He wasn't just a cobbler. He was more than that. I'll enter the competition, Ethan said, his voice firmer than he expected. And I'll show you that I'm not just some nobody. Adrian laughed, the sound cruel and dismissive. Do whatever you want, but don't say I didn't warn you. With that, Adrian turned and left, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The encounter had left him shaken, but it also left him with a newfound resolve. He would enter the competition. He would show the world, and Isla, that he was capable of more than just fixing shoes. That evening, as he sat in his room, the letter to the competition in front of him, he realized that this was his chance to finally step into the light, to stop hiding behind the shadows of his own fears. He wasn't just a cobbler. He was an artist. And now, he would prove it. Love and silence. The night of the Rising Stars exhibition arrived sooner than Ethan expected, and with it came a feeling of both anticipation and dread. His submission, a series of abstract sketches, each capturing the delicate beauty of everyday objects, things most people would overlook, was ready. It was his heart laid bare, his dreams on paper. But even as he prepared, a small voice in his mind kept whispering doubts. What if no one cared? What if his work was dismissed, ridiculed, just another failed attempt at something that could never be? Isla had been there for him through it all, watching him struggle with the decision to submit his work. She had insisted that he had the talent to succeed. Her faith in him had become his lifeline, and yet, as the hours ticked down to the opening night, Ethan felt the weight of Adrian's words pressing down on him. He was still just a cobbler, wasn't he? Someone from a different world, with nothing to offer but broken shoes and half-finished sketches. Still, he couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when he was so close to something bigger than himself. He arrived at the gallery early, just as the first guests began to trickle in. The walls were lined with stunning pieces, works of art that showcased the immense talent of the established artists Isla worked with. But Ethan's work was displayed in a modest corner, almost hidden from the main flow of the crowd. A small plaque beneath each sketch read, Ethan Lawson, Emerging Artist. His heart thudded in his chest as he stood before his pieces. The delicate lines of the sketches seemed to take on a life of their own, and he realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had created something that mattered. The words of Isla's praise, of her quiet encouragement, filled his mind as he stood there, lost in his thoughts. It wasn't long before he saw her. Isla entered the gallery, her presence unmistakable, though she moved with an ease that betrayed the tension he knew must be inside her. She was dressed in a sleek, black dress that clung to her figure, her hair pulled back into an elegant updo. As soon as she spotted him, she made her way through the crowd, her eyes locking onto his. She smiled, that soft, knowing smile that made his heart race. "You did it," she said, her voice warm as she approached him. "You actually did it." Ethan swallowed hard. "I'm not sure what this is," he gestured to his sketches, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I never thought I could be in a place like this." Isla looked at the drawings, her gaze softening. "You're exactly where you belong, Ethan. These are incredible." She turned to him, her eyes filled with something more than just admiration. "You've shown the world what you're capable of." Ethan didn't respond at first. Instead, he looked at her, his heart beating faster. This was the moment. The moment he had worked toward, not just for his art, but for the connection he felt growing between them. He began, but the words stuck in his throat. He could feel the weight of her gaze, her presence like an electric current running through his veins. He wanted to say so much, but what could he say? The silence between them was filled with everything they hadn't said, everything they had only whispered to themselves. Isla's smile faltered for a moment, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I should go. Adrian is expecting me." The words hit him like a punch, but he forced a smile, nodding even as the tightness in his chest grew. Adrian. Of course, she had to be with him. He couldn't forget that Isla was already spoken for, already bound to someone else. And yet, here they were, standing in this quiet corner of the gallery, their hearts beating in time with the unspoken tension that hung between them. "I'll see you later," Isla said, her voice softer now. "You've done more than enough tonight." As she turned to leave, Ethan stood rooted to the spot, watching her disappear into the crowd. He wasn't sure what he had hoped for, maybe for her to stay with him a little longer, to offer him more than just words. But he knew the truth. Isla belonged to a world far removed from his own. No matter how much they connected, no matter how much he cared, their paths would always be divided by a line he couldn't cross. Underscore 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 underscore. The evening continued, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere, his thoughts consumed by Isla and the ache of watching her walk away. He didn't notice when the first round of judging began, or when the gallery began to fill with even more important guests. What he did notice was the cold hand that gripped his chest when Adrian appeared beside him. Adrian's presence was like a shadow, and Ethan couldn't help but feel that he was being measured, scrutinized. "You did well," Adrian said, his voice low and almost predatory. "I'm surprised you even bothered to enter." Ethan glanced up at him, his heart sinking. "I didn't do it for you." Adrian chuckled, his gaze flickering over the sketches before settling back on Ethan. "No. I can tell. But you should know your place. Isla is mine, and she always will be. No matter what you think or what you've done here tonight." The words were venomous, meant to wound. And they did. But they also solidified something inside Ethan. This was his life now, his choice. Whether Adrian liked it or not, he had taken his shot. He had shown the world his talent, and he had shown Isla that he was more than just a cobbler. As Adrian walked away, Ethan stood alone in the corner, his thoughts scattered, his heart heavy. The night had not gone as he had hoped, but the journey had only just begun. The world had been set in motion, and for better or worse, Ethan had taken the first step towards something bigger. Tawa. Ard something bigger. Toward a life that was no longer defined by silence. Ruin and redemption. The days following the Rising Stars exhibition felt like an endless blur to Ethan. The excitement of the night had long since faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread that he couldn't shake. Adrian's words, cold and dismissive, echoed in his mind constantly. Isla is mine, and she always will be. The competition had been the catalyst for something he could never have prepared for. While he had hoped for recognition, even the smallest acknowledgement, what he hadn't counted on was the fallout. Adrian's quiet threats had followed him like a shadow. And worse, Isla had grown distant, her smiles fewer and further between. He hadn't seen her since the gallery. She hadn't called, and the brief encounters that had once been filled with quiet connection had now been replaced by a suffocating silence. Every time Ethan tried to reach out, to ask if she wanted to meet or to talk, his messages went unanswered. It wasn't just the silence that hurt, it was the sense of inevitability that he felt whenever he thought of Adrian. He had never stood a chance. But Ethan wasn't the only one feeling the weight of their worlds pulling apart. Isla had been avoiding the gallery for days, and even when she did show up, she was different. Her once vibrant energy had dimmed. She had become like a ghost, walking through the motions of her life, but never fully present. One afternoon, after days of silence, Ethan stood outside the gallery. He had to see her, to understand what had happened. If there was any chance left, any sliver of hope, he had to know. He hesitated outside the door, his heart beating erratically as he pushed it open. The familiar scent of oil paint and fresh canvas filled the air, but the room was quiet. Isla was nowhere to be seen. But there was someone else. Adrian. Ethan's stomach twisted as he saw the man standing near the entrance, speaking in hushed tones with one of the gallery assistants. His posture was stiff, his expression cold. Adrian had a way of filling a room with his presence, making even the most extravagant space seem smaller, more claustrophobic. Before Ethan could turn to leave, Adrian's sharp eyes caught sight of him. His lips curled into a knowing smile. "Ethan," Adrian said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "I didn't expect to see you here. I was wondering how long it would take for you to come crawling back." Ethan stood his ground, his fists clenched by his sides. "I'm not here for you." "Ah," Adrian said with a smirk. "But that's the thing, isn't it? You never were. You think you can just waltz in and make something of yourself? You think you can take her from me?" Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "I don't want to take anything from you, Adrian. I just wanted to make something of myself." Adrian's smile faltered for a moment, and then he laughed, the sound cold and bitter. "You've already made your bed, Ethan. You'll always be a nobody. Isla will always be my fiancé, and you'll always be the man who fixes shoes. You're not part of her world. You never will be." Before Ethan could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Adrian, stop." It was Isla. She stepped into the room, her face pale and drawn. She had been standing just outside the door, watching the exchange. Her eyes were tired, but when she looked at Ethan, something shifted. It was as if she was finally seeing him again, as if the fog that had clouded her mind had lifted, even if just for a moment. Isla stepped toward them, her gaze never leaving Ethan's. She didn't look at Adrian. She didn't have to. "I've had enough of this," Isla said, her voice quiet but firm. "Enough of you." She turned to Adrian, her expression resolute. "I'm done. With you. With everything." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to speak, to tell her that it was okay, that she didn't have to do this, but the words stuck in his throat. He had no idea what had just happened, but it felt like the world had shifted. Adrian's face twisted with disbelief. "You're done? You're leaving me over this, over him?" Isla didn't flinch. "Yes. I've realized something, Adrian. All this time, I've been living a life that isn't mine. I've been doing what others expect of me. But I can't do it anymore. I can't live in a world where everything is about appearances and power. I don't want that." Adrian's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't speak. He knew there was nothing more to say. The power he had held over her was gone. Isla's gaze shifted to Ethan. I've been avoiding you because I didn't know what to do," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't keep pretending like I don't care. I do care. More than I ever let myself believe." Ethan's heart raced as Isla walked toward him, her eyes filled with emotion, her voice soft but full of conviction. I should have told you this sooner. I was afraid, Ethan. Afraid of losing everything, afraid of the life I've built. But now I realize that what I built isn't real. Not without you in it. Before he could respond, she reached out, her hand gently touching his. The simple act, the quiet connection between them, felt like everything he had longed for. In that moment, there were no barriers, no worlds apart, no distinctions between rich and poor. There was only them, standing in the middle of a storm, finally ready to face what came next. Adrian stood by, watching them with cold eyes, but he didn't speak. His presence, once so domineering, now felt like nothing more than an echo of a past they were both leaving behind. Isla, Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she replied, her smile bittersweet. I think we both know what's been left unsaid. And with that, the silence between them was finally broken. But even as Isla and Ethan stood together, ready to face whatever came next, the world around them wasn't finished with them yet. Adrian's shadow still lingered, and the price of their love would not come cheap. There would be consequences. But for now, in that moment, all that mattered was that they had each other. Whispers beneath the rain. The rain had returned. It wasn't the torrential downpour that had brought them together months ago. No, this time, the rain was gentle, falling in a steady rhythm against the cobblestones as Isla stood under the small awning of Ethan's stall, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made his heart race. He had never seen her like this before. Her once flawless exterior, polished, poised, had softened. The walls she had built, the barriers she had placed between them, were gone. She was just Isla now. A woman who had chosen to follow her heart, even if it meant giving up everything she had once known. Ethan had been waiting for her. The world around him had remained unchanged, his little stall still nestled in the corner of Queensway and Alder Street. But inside him, everything had shifted. He had seen her struggle, had watched her fight for what was hers, and now, as she stood before him, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. You came, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Isla smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I had to. I couldn't stay away any longer, Ethan. I couldn't keep pretending. The words hung between them, simple yet profound. They didn't need to say more. The silence spoke volumes, telling them everything they needed to know. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He felt free. Free from the expectations that had once defined him, free from the fear that had held him captive. I've made my choice, Isla whispered, her voice steady, unwavering. And it's you, Ethan. Always you. Tears welled in his eyes as he took a step toward her, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. For all the doubts, all the pain they had endured, they had found their way back to each other. And now, there was no more hiding, no more pretending. I've been waiting for this moment, he said, his voice barely audible. Isla reached up to gently cup his face in her hands. I'm sorry for the time we lost. For not seeing you sooner. But I won't let go of this now, Ethan. I'll never let go. Her words, so simple, so sincere, were all he needed to hear. He leaned into her touch, his forehead resting against hers as the rain continued to fall softly around them, creating a world just for the two of them. In this moment, nothing else mattered. I love you, he whispered, the words coming easily now. No more hesitation. No more doubt. I've always loved you. Isla's smile deepened, her eyes closing for a moment as she breathed in the moment. I love you too, Ethan. The rain seemed to pause, just for a beat, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. But when it resumed, it felt like a new beginning. A new chapter in their lives, one where they would write their own story. Not the story that society had tried to force upon them, or the one that Adrian had tried to dictate. But a story that was uniquely theirs. Isla stepped back, her fingers still intertwined with his. I've made arrangements. The gallery, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not going back. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. You mean? I'm going to stay here, with you, she said, her voice full of quiet determination. We'll build something together. Something real. Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. A world that had once seemed so far out of reach was now within his grasp. He wasn't just a cobbler. He was a man who had found love, who had discovered his own worth through the love of someone who saw him for who he truly was. The next few days were a blur of decisions, of plans made and paths chosen. The world they had once feared was now theirs to shape. Together, they began to rebuild, to create a future that was filled with hope and possibilities. Isla used her connections to help Ethan launch a small gallery of his own. He didn't need the accolades or the recognition, but he wanted to share his work with the world. And with Isla by his side, he knew that whatever they created together would be something beautiful. As for Adrian, his power and influence faded into the background. He had tried to hold on to Isla, to control her, but the more she embraced her true self, the more he became irrelevant. Isla had chosen love over wealth, connection over status, and in the end, it was the only thing that mattered. Months later, the rain had become a gentle reminder of how far they had come. Ethan stood outside the small gallery they had opened together, his hand in Isla's, watching the world move on as they stood still, their love a quiet force beneath the storm. You know, Isla said, looking up at him with a smile, I think I was always meant to find you. Ethan grinned, his heart full. I think so too. And as they stood there, the sound of the rain echoing in the distance, Ethan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, their love would be their anchor. They had weathered the storm, and now, together, they could face anything. The whispers beneath the rain had led them to each other, and now, there was only the promise of tomorrow.